forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. And I really appreciate the work that you do and all of the amazing support that you've given to the struggle to protect and improve public health care, from your chapter, from other retired teachers. You have been amazing. And I think you really understand deeply what the issues are that are at stake. But just to bring it down to a very human level, I think some of you will have heard me talk about Margaret before, but I want to tell you about a woman named Margaret. Margaret loved music. She was a foster child herself, and when she grew up, she became a foster mother to dozens of children. She was amazingly generous, welcoming single moms with kids, sometimes for years at a time, into her home. She was loved by her family, her community, and all the children that she cared for. She was extraordinary and unique. And as a society, we should have seen her life as precious, as worth protecting. Instead, Margaret died in August in a hospital after months of decline and suffering in her long-term care home. In her last months, Margaret was isolated in the home. She didn't receive the foot care for which her family paid extra, and she developed painful sores and infected blisters on her feet. She didn't receive her pain medication either, and her daughter describes her spending hours on the phone crying in pain. Her daughter would try to phone the nurse's station. There were so few staff. The nurse's station was too busy to speak. It was hard to get a hold of them, and then it would take hours for them to help. Margaret's decline was suffered alone and without adequate care. Her daughter was shut out and unable to help. Like all residents in long-term care, Margaret paid for her care, and we all helped to pay as taxpayers, but Margaret didn't get it. There were 30 residents in her wing and only 1 or 2 PSWs at any time for all of them. Margaret didn't see a doctor from January to June. She died of kidney failure in a hospital from a serious untreated UTI, urinary tract infection, in August. What her daughter said will never, is seared in my memory. She said, "I know my mom is out of pain. My family would like me to let this all go, but I don't feel I can. My natural reaction of grief is frozen because it's not over or resolved. Caring for people was a thing that my mom believed in, and she would have wanted me to speak up. She wouldn't want me to stay silent. It's just all wrong," her daughter said. "My mind and my soul will never be the same." It makes me cry to think about Margaret and her daughter and the thousands of people who, just like Margaret and her daughter, we have met in the last 3 years of the pandemic and even before the pandemic, who have suffered so egregiously while in care, well in healthcare in Ontario, in 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. This is modern day Ontario. And the fact that the elderly continue to be treated in this way is among the worst things that I've ever seen. And so Margaret died. She didn't die of COVID. She died of neglect. And she joins 4,500, more than 4,500 human beings, according to Public Health Ontario, who have now died of COVID in Ontario's long-term care homes, one of the worst records in the world. This is not normal. This is just a horrific record. And thousands more who, like Margaret, died of just lack of care, some of starvation, some of dehydration. If you can imagine, just for want of food and water and someone to have time to feed people, some of a lack of access to medical care, some of isolation and depression. It is awful what's happened, and it is not fixed in Ontario's long-term care. And now the staffing crisis that we're seeing in long-term care, which in long-term care, it's partly because it's significantly because the majority of long-term care in Ontario is privatized. Mike Harris, there was always some for-profit long-term care, mostly sort of retired nurses that owned kind of ma and pa shop long-term care homes. This is back in the day, though, before the major hospital cuts of the late 1990s, when people would go drive to the long-term care home with their own bags and check themselves in. That is not the state of people who are going into long-term care now. People who are going into long-term care need they need a lot of care. They need a significant amount of care, and some are total care. Many have dementia, the vast majority have dementia, and they have high levels of care needs. You wouldn't have people driving, carrying their luggage in and checking themselves into long-term care homes anymore. When Mike Harris cut the hospital beds, and they cut about 19,500 or so hospital beds, they opened 20,000 new long-term care beds and handed them over to for-profit companies. It was a straight privatization, really offloading and privatization. And then he left office and went to join the board of Chartwell, one of the large for-profit long-term care chains, and one of the companies to which his government had awarded a significant number of long-term care beds. And boom, the majority of long-term care in Ontario was owned and operated by for-profit companies, many of them chains, a number of them not even healthcare companies, but investment companies in it to take out as much money as possible. They contract out the entire home and its operation to a second company that also runs for profit. And you have tiers upon tiers of companies taking profit out of providing care rather than providing the best possible care. There is no question this had a major impact in Ontario. The death rates in the for-profit long-term care homes are far higher than they are in the nonprofit and public homes, 5 times higher than they were in the publicly owned long-term care homes. And we continue to have very serious staffing problems. One of the key things that the for-profits do is they pay staff significantly less. They hire more part-time and casual workers. And so they have worse staffing. When staffing shortages emerged around 2015 and got worse and worse and worse, and definitely much worse in the pandemic, the staffing shortages were much more profound in the for-profits, and that continues to this day. And there is no care without staff. There simply is no care without staff. People need to understand that. It seems such a basic thing, but it's very true. Without someone to shower you, to toilet, to provide oral hygiene and foot care, to take time to feed, to give social interaction, people are left lying for hours and hours on beds, staring at blank walls or televisions with no interaction and no care. And so now the staffing shortage has spread. Home care is in desperate situation. We are hearing from people who cannot get any home care at all, from moms with kids who have, total care needs, who have allocated home care hours that they could get funded by the public system, but they cannot find any workers. Almost all of the families that I work with can't find anyone to work overnight. They can't find a nurse, period, not for any amount of money to work overnight. They can't find personal support workers. Many of them have had to quit their jobs in order to have at least one parent stay home 24/7 with a child. It has caused enormous financial hardship for them. Home care is in the worst crisis that we have ever seen. And even in our hospitals, where the workers are much more highly paid, we're hearing for the first time ever about major staffing crises. Emergency departments operating at 8 or 10 nurses short every single day, ICUs doubling up on patients, so that instead of having 1 nurse to 1 patient ratio, there'll be 2 or sometimes 3 patients to 1 nurse. These things are unheard of in our healthcare system. They require immediate address. And so when we think about what happened in the provincial election, the way that I think about it is this: We succeeded in making healthcare a major issue. We did everything we possibly could. We pushed the opposition parties, all of them, the NDP earlier for sure, but then the Liberals and the Greens to take a strong position against for-profit privatization. And they, at the beginning of their election campaign, the Liberals came out and said that they would end for-profit long-term care, something that I had met with Stephen Del Duca about multiple times over the previous year, and his staff, and John Fraser, who was the critic for the Liberal critic for healthcare, and we had pushed and pushed and pushed through riding associations, through every means that we could, and they did adopt finally the position that we asked them to. But really, none of the parties took up the healthcare, the long-term care issues, the egregious death rates and suffering that are still ongoing, the absolute staffing crisis in healthcare that will be the limiting factor in people getting their surgeries and their diagnostic tests and so on. It just didn't happen. The election, I feel, was a non-event to most people. Almost 3 in 5 didn't vote. Most of those who didn't vote with much enthusiasm. The NDP saw its vote fall by 40%, and it wasn't just that Ford, did well. He didn't. His vote fell. More people than abstained than voted for him, and more voted for others than for Ford. But the main thing is that people didn't understand what the risks are, that we didn't get that through to the general public, that the opposition did not have any kind of clear message about an alternative, and that the social movements, by and large, were missing in action. The government has privatized childcare. Nobody knows this. That childcare deal that they used as a political opportunity and delayed for a year. People could have had public childcare, subsidized childcare for an entire year before the election, had they not chosen to use it as an election prep. And then insisted that the childcare deal with the federal government included an expansion of for-profit childcare, increasing it from, is it 20 or 25% to 35%? That should have been news. The housing issues, access to housing, the privatization of ODSP and social assistance, and so on. We need to do some soul searching, I think, among the social movements, because without opposition, without people creating the fight back on a whole range of issues, the public does not know what's happening. We do need to also challenge the media who let Ford get away with making statements that were patently untrue without challenge. They acted as scribes, by and large, just repeating his press conferences verbatim without real challenge. So we do have a job to do, but I have to say at the end of it, I am really proud of the effort of the Health Coalition. I didn't see much out there that was like what we did. We put out 23,000 signs to calling for the end to for-profit privatization of healthcare. I have done maybe 400, 500 media interviews in the last year. We have a staff of 3. I don't think we could have done more than we did. We put out videos that reached more than 100,000 people, leaflets, had volunteers mobilized across the province. It needed to be taken up by the parties and wasn't, but we did actually shift the parties. We did set the key issues for the media, and we'll just need to now continue the fight in the way that we were before. We will be bringing, we have a team of investigators, retired police, who are looking at the long-term care homes, the for-profits, and we're seeing if we can bring criminal charges against some of those for-profit homes. So we'll pursue a legal method in that. We will use every possible means under the law to stop the provincial government from charging patients for medically needed services. So right now they're charging for COVID tests, $200 or more. That's a violation of the Canada Health Act. I have a letter ready to go to Justin Trudeau to call on the federal government, and we'll hold protests and we'll, ratchet it up across the country to get the Canada Health Act upheld. If they try to privatize our hospitals, we will take action including, surrounding hospitals, protests, and escalating actions. We will be speaking with the healthcare unions about, lunchtime walkouts and so on in long-term care to try and force them to actually increase the care levels. So there are things we can do and we will do, and our commitment to you is that we'll continue to fight as hard as we can to protect and improve our public health care services and deal with the critical staffing crisis that we're in. I'll just end with a note I hope that is optimistic. It comes from Helen Keller, and she said, I cannot do everything, but I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something I can do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalie. Do you have time for one question? I just saw one of our participants.
Yeah, I can be a bit late. Like I figured if it's okay, I can stay till 11:10 or 11:15 or so.
That would be lovely, but certainly, yeah. So I saw Linda Karn indicate she has a question. Linda, go ahead.
No, it wasn't a question. It was an agreement that charges should be brought.
Well, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, charges should be brought because I know of people that died and there was no excuse for it.
Well, no, sure. Okay, so knowing that there's a little bit of leeway time.
I think Michelle had her hand up.
Okay, I can't see the whole screen. Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
No, I didn't. I had a clapping reaction at the end of a wonderful
Yes, well, no, sure.
Very good. So any other questions? You can either raise your hand on the screen because I can see the whole screen. Those of you whose cameras are not working, try and use your reaction raise hand. And if that isn't working, just unmute and ask and say, may I ask a question?
I see Margaret Maffeo.
No, she was also thanking.
It was clapping. That was clapping hands.
So listen, Natalie, of course, we admire and absolutely respect all of the advocacy work that you and your small crew at OHC and across the province with all your chapters are doing. So we want to put our money where our mouth is. And so the executive at our last meeting authorized another donation for the OHC of $500. So we're going to have Michelle, our treasurer, then facilitate that e-transfer. But no, I mean, we've given obviously in the past, but especially if you're looking at court challenges now, money will be pretty important. So on our behalf, then please take that and with our sincere gratitude. So. Oh
wow! I wish you could see my face because I'm grinning from ear to ear. Thank you very, very much.
We're just gonna have to visualize what you look like. So.
I'm so sorry. What a weird thing. It just will not work. But thank you very, very much. Yeah, we're gonna do our utmost. This thing about bringing charges is a difficult one because by and large, the families were locked out of the homes, when many of the people died that we know. And so we need evidence. It's difficult to get evidence, but we have since last fall been working with this team of retired police who are investigating in the same way that they would do an investigation as police officers. And we're pretty close, I think, on the first one, and then we'll go on to the next one. And, there has to be some accountability for this. There has to be. So we'll do everything we possibly can to make that happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. I've got a question from Jim Mile. Jim, go ahead with your question. You're muted, Jim. Unmute.
He's being harassing.
Natalie, the inspection of these long-term care homes. There was once back a few years ago that the inspections were sporadic. They were notified ahead of time that the inspectors were coming, and it looked like the inspection regime was just a farce. Has there been any change, and can you use any of those inspection reports in your lawsuit?
Yeah, so, ironically, we did a video about this because to me, it's so shocking. When the military reports came out, I don't know if you recall, but the military went into 5 homes and then they came out with reports, and the reports were just, I mean, they made Canadians across the country recoil in horror. They said that they found cockroach infestations, residents lying on bare mattresses on floors so that they couldn't get up and walk because there weren't enough staff to, deal with them walking around. They had, they talked about residents dying of dehydration. They, they were horrific. And after that, Doug Ford had a press conference and he said no stone would be left unturned. He said that they were going to reinstate the inspections, which they had canceled right when they took office in 2018. They canceled all of the inspections. These are we're talking about the annual surprise inspections of the homes. This happened back when the Harris government was in, they also canceled their annual unannounced inspections. And the Liberals and the NDP, we fought with them to get the inspections back. We got them back in 2001. And then they sort of stopped doing them kind of without announcing it. And we got them back again. And then 2018, the Ford government gets in and they cancel them again. And so after the military reports, they promised to bring them back in. Well, that was 2019, what was the first year of the pandemic, 2020. And by last fall, they brought in a new Long-Term Care Homes Act. And in the prelude to that act, the Minister of Long-Term Care did this kind of media tour and said that they were going to, bring back in the inspections and, do all of this stuff. Well, they haven't. They delayed them. What they actually did was delay them for 2 years. They changed the inspections regime to reduce the number of standards the homes have to meet. And they now say that they'll have done one inspection of all the homes within 2 years of that. That would have been last fall, which I'll believe it when I see it. I mean, the bottom line is the for-profits lobby against inspections, and we fight for them on the public interest side. So we're going to have a big fight to get the inspections back, and no, they are not happening. But there are a few inspection reports, because when the inspectors go in for critical incidents or family complaints, they do an inspection. And, to the extent that they exist, we could use those, yes. I just think it's shocking because it's another example of how the government is acting in the interests of the for-profit industry and what they want, what they've lobbied for years and years, and against the public interest, even now, after all the suffering. I find it, even I, who, have watched politics very closely for 25 years, find it shocking and appalling.
Thank you very much, Natalie. I don't see any more questions. So what I think I'm going to do is maybe turn it over to Manfred to thank you, and then I'm going to stop the recording. Manfred?
Sorry, Chris.
Oh, go ahead, Linda.
One quick question
Sure.
for Natalie. I can't remember the name of the bill, and I'm my bad for that, but the legislation that Ford put forward to prevent privately owned long-term care facilities from being sued by families, where is that at right now? Do you know?
Yeah, so again, they passed that a few months after Ford made those, responded to the military report and said that they were going to hold people accountable, including criminal charges and fines and so on. Not one home has been fined. They brought no criminal charges. Not one operator lost its license. Fined under the Long-Term Care Homes Act, which is what everyone was talking about. There was one home fined for something to do with labor, workers' health and safety. And then they passed Bill 218, which is the bill that shields, it shields anyone from lawsuits for negligence in COVID. But of course, the only lawsuits that we could find were lawsuits against the for-profit long-term care homes. It was definitely written with that in mind. So the families, all of their lawsuits were wiped out. They had to refile for gross negligence and prove a higher bar, which is gross negligence under the new act, which also changed and kind of made looser wording around what the homes have to do to defend themselves, the operators. So instead of what is normal, which would be a reasonable and competent effort, they just had to have operated in good faith. Yeah, so that passed and that's on the books.
Thank you. Thanks again.
All right. So Natalie, very much appreciated that you've allotted a bit more time for us. So
No, thank you, Manfred, and thank you so much for your generosity, all of you, and for your support. It means
well,
It means the
we're
world to
going to
us.
continue, of course, and we encourage our individual members to contribute to Ontario Health Coalition. But yeah, it's going to be a big fight, and of course, you'll probably feel vindicated now that his strategies were approved by the Ontario electorate. So we have to be more vigilant, right?
Yeah.
And now he's got his nephew at Queen's Park too, although he made it by only 800 votes in that riding. However, 2 Fords at the Queen's Park.
Yuck.
Yeah, no, exactly. So again, thanks very much. And we'll keep in touch, of course, and hopefully we'll get to see it at some point in the future in person. Right? So,
Totally. Okay. And I promise you next time I will have a working computer. Thank you very much.
thanks, Natalie. Yeah.